and welcome to the NewsOK Varsity Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Unruh, here with the Oklahoman, and I'm here with Trent, Shadid, my colleague and partner on the Oklahoma Preps beat. And we got another exciting week for you here with Week 5 coming up. A lot of big matchups, but we want to first reflect on last week with the big Norman North Owasso matchup. Trent, you were there. Talk about that game.
Yeah, it was an interesting to kind of see if this Oklahoma City area side of the state, the west side, as people call it, 6A1, could stack up with the big-time teams in the Tulsa area. Owasso has emerged this year after beating Jinx there in Week 3, kind of emerged is right there with Tulsa Union as one of the big ones in 6A1. So it was kind of a this side versus that side sort of deal, and Owasso really just dominated the game. Their defense has been outstanding through 4 weeks, and that really showed that night. They were facing a big, high-powered offense with Norman North. John Kolar's a great quarterback. Quan Hogan's a great running back. And Owasso really just handled them. Their defensive line is really, really good. Their linebackers are really good. They're a little thin in the back end, but they do so much kind of with their front 7-8 guys there on defense that it was tough for Norman North to get anything going. They forced some turnovers, jumped out to a big 28-0 lead, and then just kind of cruised there in the second half. And then offensively for Owasso, I was kind of impressed. Gabe Neff, their quarterback, coming into the game, a lot of people kind of said, well, he runs it okay, but he can't really throw it. And I was impressed with him. I thought he threw it really well. He threw 4 touchdown passes to 4 different receivers, and that's pretty remarkable in itself. He made good decisions. So, Owasso's a team that definitely will be a force in 6A1, and after the game I had a chance to talk with Coach Bill Patterson, and here's some of what he had to say.
Well, our defense is really playing well. Up front defensively, our defensive line is really physical, and it was tougher for us tonight to get pressure on the passer because the ball came out so quick. Kohler does a really nice job of getting rid of it, but thought we were outstanding in the back end. Both our corners played extremely well. We had some turnovers, had a couple of really nice interceptions, so just really proud of our defense. They're playing well.
Now, on the other side of that, your offense, you probably did a better job in the last few weeks of turning those turnovers into points. Talk about that.
This was the first game of the year that we've had really good field position consistently. We've been backed up a lot previous to this, and obviously that really helps. But, I felt like we hit some big plays in the passing game, and in our offense, we've got to hit those shots. We hit one in the first half, and we hit one at the end of the half. I'd like to see us be a little bit more consistent in our running game, but I think that'll come with time.
Now, your quarterback play was pretty outstanding tonight, too.
Gabe is a great competitor. He really executes our offense well. He's a really good leader out there. You can't get him rattled, and he just does a really nice job.
Well, Trent, one thing that stood out to me in that interview was he talked about they struggled to get the pressure on Kolar. But yet Kolar was still 14 of 31 for 170 yards and only 2 touchdowns. It didn't seem like a very good night for him. He didn't get in rhythm. Just what are your thoughts on those comments?
Yeah, and I think some of it, he said it was tough to get pressure on him because he was having to get the ball out so quick. And I think that Kolar, being the quarterback that he is, committed to Oklahoma State verbally, of course, he understood that he had to get the ball out quick and he had to get rid of it. And so on the other side of that, your receivers have to make plays. And that's kind of Norman North has struggled. The 3 times I've seen them this year, eventually Quan Hogan, Nathan Womack, even Charlie Kolar, John Chung, brother at receiver, those guys get going later in the game, but early on they struggle with some drops, and that's exactly what happened against Owasso. Owasso did struggle to get pressure, but it was just because Kolar is such a good quarterback, getting the ball out quick. But, on their first couple drives, I remember dropping some 3rd and 8s, and you're going to pick it up. Your receiver's wide open, puts it right on him, and they drop the pass. And then, on the other side of that, Norman North's defense isn't very well equipped to stop anybody. So then when you give Owasso a short field, the next thing you know, you're down 28-0. So, yeah, it was more of Kolar realizing he had to get the ball out quick, but when the guys around him don't make plays, he's going to have a tough night.
Real quick, I know we haven't seen Tulsa Union, but Owasso's now beaten Jinx and Norman North in consecutive weeks. Do we think Owasso can challenge Union?
Having not seen Union, like you said, I would still say yes, just because I have a hard time believing that there's a better defensive front and linebackers than what Owasso puts on the field. Those guys are phenomenal. So, yeah, I would say so. Now, offensively, Patterson, kind of had touched on how their offense struggled to move the ball a little bit, and then they finally gave them some short fields against Norman North, and that's what allowed them to move the ball and put up some points. So, I guess the offense was good against Norman North. Would it be good against everybody else? So far this year, it hadn't been great. But I think the potential is there. I think Gabe Neff's a good player. They got 3 or 4 guys that can play running back, receiver. So, yeah, I think Owasso is good enough to challenge Tulsa Union.
Speaking of those challengers, Westmoore's got another big game this week. They survived in overtime last week against Norman, and now they have Edmond Santa Fe. You're going to be there, but you saw Dahu Green's spectacular touchdown catch live that made SportsCenter his top 10. I watched it on video. I wasn't there live, but it was one of the most incredible catches I've seen in a long time. What was your reaction when you saw that?
The first thing I thought, and I actually tweeted it out, is the best catch I've ever seen in a high school game. And I still, I wasn't really caught up in the moment because now going back and looking at it, I still think, I don't know that I've ever seen a better catch than that in a high school game. Certainly not one that comes to mind. It's funny. I gotta give a shout out to our buddy Michael Kinney at the Norman Transcript. He almost went through the roof when he made the catch. The press box was kind of, even as writers were like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. But no, it was, but that's what we've come to kind of expect from Dahu. I mean, he's made I've covered, I think, all their games so far this year, all 4, but he's made 2 or 3 one-handed catches, some snags on fade routes in the corner of the end zone that which is what that was the other night in double coverage. And so when you're 6'4" like that, nearly 6'5", 200 pounds, he's just impossible to cover. Big hands. Physically he's just off the charts, and that's what Gaylor said after the game when we were talking about that catch. It was something special, and it number 1 on SportsCenter's neighborhood top plays of the week. So that's that didn't really surprise me.
With Santa Fe this week, they have some different challenges. They're facing a really good running back in Darren Williams, and Keaton Torrey is a good quarterback who's still developing, but they've limited his touches, and I think it's been a good move offensively to really focus on getting the ball to Williams. Can their defense slow down Santa Fe enough?
It's tough to say. Norman North Westmoore's defense it's kind of week to week from what I've seen. Last week they struggled. Norman, Coach Craig Nation does a great job in coaching up the running game. They're always really solid in the running game every year. And Norman really controlled that game. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like Westmoore's one of those teams that it seems like they're just going to find a way to win late in games. They've done that a couple of times this year. So their offense, picked them up late. But, I think Westmoore was thinking late in that game, we don't want to when they scored to make it 28-27, I think that they really thought about going for 2 and trying to win the game there in the last minute in regulation, because I don't think they wanted to put their defense on the field for much longer. And if Norman's going to roll you like that, it's tough to say that Santa Fe isn't going to do the same thing. So, that's one that could be a shootout. But Westmoore's defense is just kind of a week-to-week thing. Gaylor was a former defensive coordinator there, their head coach now. So he knows what he's doing, but I just don't know if he has enough pieces to slow teams like Edmond Santa Fe down.
And on the opposite side, I think the matchup of Ashton Preston and Dahu Green will be really intriguing. Preston's committed to North Texas and as a physical defensive back and very good in coverage. And I know they're good friends too. They tweet each other a lot and seem to hang out a lot. And I know Keaton Torrey's good friends with Dahu. They went to Louisville on a trip together earlier before the season. And so there's a lot of intriguing storylines to watch with Dahu this week. And moving on to other action around the state, our top game this week is Stillwater and Midwest City, and it's a really big matchup early in the season that I didn't expect necessarily out of Stillwater, because I didn't really know what Stillwater was coming into the season with, and they lose their quarterback Braxton Noble, and I think this is going to be really intriguing to see if Stillwater can score on Midwest City's defense. Just what are your thoughts on this matchup?
Midwest City's defense is maybe the best in the state, regardless of class. Their defense is going to give them a chance to compete in 6A2 with anybody throughout the whole season. So it's interesting to see. And like you said with Stillwater, they weren't necessarily on the radar to start the season, and then they start winning some games. They beat Mustang, who's a good 6A1 team in the non-district play. and they've kind of continued to roll. But like you mentioned with Braxton Noble there, I think is an interesting thing. He's been hurt, 3 years in a row, and he's always been the starter. So what do you, as far as what you know, they've got a great receiver, I know, but do you think they can move the ball at all against Midwest City?
I think they can. I like what they do with Jordan Brown at running back, and I think Brandon Prather is he's still arguably one of the best athletes on that field, even with Midwest City's athletes, with Will Sunderland and guys around him. Brandon Prather is a very special, gifted athlete that I think some colleges are going to come in on late in the season and see what happens. So I think they'll be able to move the ball. I think it's going to be a low scoring game as a result, because I'm not sure Midwest City's offense is going to be able to move the ball enough to score enough points. So that's going to be a really intriguing game. Switching directions here, we've talked about this week's top game, but what other storylines are you looking for this week?
I think Class 4A has caught my interest because the team, Clinton's kind of jumped between 4A and 3A some years, but whatever class they're in, everyone's thinking and talking about Clinton. They're going to Anadarko this week for what preseason you would expect would be a huge game, obviously. Mm-hmm. Anadarko's rolled kind of the way people thought they would, defending state champions. Clinton is 1-3, and in a tough district where you're kind of thinking, hey, these guys are about to start out 0-2 after the loss to Weatherford last week in the district. They've made the playoffs every year, I think, since 88 or 89. They might be in jeopardy of not even making the playoffs. They've still got Anadarko this week, at Newcastle later, still got to play Woodward. So it's a tough district. But for that Anadarko-Clinton game this weekend, what do you expect from that one?
I kind of worry for Clinton a little bit. I just pulled up Anadarko's stats. They've allowed 7 points in 4 games. They allowed a touchdown to Altus and shut out Chickasha, Midwest City's junior varsity team, which I don't put much stock in, and then shut out Elk City last week. The struggles I've heard on offense for Clinton are kind of alarming going into a game with Anadarko where they're loaded with Tremaine Wadua and Malik Boardingham and Brandon Pollard and Josh Parton and guys like that on the defense that are so talented and physical that it could be very troublesome for an offense that's struggling, even with Simpkins in the backfield doing what he can do. I think it's very concerning for Clinton.
It's kind of interesting. Clinton makes the transition from Mike Lee to Phil Coons, who'd been at Tuttle, and any time Lee had been there for 24 years, I think it was 9 state championships, and he's kind of the real popular guy out in Western Oklahoma, and in Clinton, and they make the transition, and now they're struggling. Is it maybe a little bit of a change in style? Is it just maybe a different coach? What do you think that it is that's making them struggle? I
think there is an adjustment period to the new coach. Coons is the same mold as Mike Lee, but I think he's still a different coach. He's bringing his philosophy in, his weightlifting philosophy, his offense, things like that. And I think there's an adjustment period. Now Clinton, they've got talent. I don't know that they have the talent up front that they've always had in the past, but I think they've got enough talent that they can still make the playoffs in this district, even just being 0-1 into this game and into the district schedule. And I think they could get going by the end of the season, but it's going to be a long haul with the schedule they have left. But congrats to you being a Weatherford native on beating them. I know big rivalry. You're probably pretty thrilled about that as an alumnus of Weatherford.
Right. It's not very often that Weatherford gets one on Clinton. So my dad's still the high school principal out there. Actually, my mom teaches there, so I got a lot of connections back in Weatherford. But it is anytime Weatherford can win the Custer County conflict, it's a big deal. But I think one thing that's interesting about Clinton, and mentioned them possibly coming back from this 1-3 start. I looked up the last time they started 1-3 was 1994, and they actually ended up the next week going to 1-4 because they lost to Weatherford that year. They didn't lose another game until the state finals against Ada. So it's kind of like Clinton is, and considering the early season schedule they've played and some tough teams, it's never a team you can count out. So, who knows? I'm not saying that they're going to end up, reeling off 10 straight, 9 straight, but, who knows? We'll see.
Could have woken the beast, right?
Right. Maybe that's what, you don't lose to Weatherford very often, so maybe when it actually happens now, Clinton's.
If they roll over Anadarko, we might have to change our tune next week.
Exactly right.
What were you going to be this week, Trent?
This week, Westmoore, Santa Fe. Like we mentioned, it seems like I'm covering Westmoore every week, but it's a fun team to watch. It's a fun matchup to watch. I think you mentioned the kind of the defensive back receiver matchup between those two teams, with Westmoore having the receivers, Santa Fe the defensive backs, and it'll be curious to see because Dahu Green's made some great plays and some great catches, and those guys have kind of worked over some secondaries early in the season. But I think maybe they haven't had the secondary that they're going to face, or maybe the athletes that they're going to face in Santa Fe. So we'll see.
Someone to watch out for in that too is Calvin Bundage at Santa Fe. He's a big, tall safety who can deliver some hits, and he covers well from what I've seen in a few games from him. And I'm sure they're going to be using him over the top on Dahu or Stephon Robinson and guys like that. So that's going to be really intriguing.
Right. I'd say it's the Santa Fe is finally a team that athletically maybe can at least match up a little bit. So.
Yeah. I'm going to hang out at Cassidy Thursday night to watch them play Dallas Greenhill. Cassidy is off to a really good start. Denver Johnson was our fans' choice for Player of the Week last week after having over 200 yards receiving and a couple touchdowns, including a 50-yard touchdown to win the game. Iowa State fans pointed out to me on Twitter that they had a part in that voting, which is not surprising. Iowa State fans rally around their players, and he's going there for a reason, and he's obviously proven that. So I'm excited to see if he can duplicate that again. And then I'll get to see the big McGinnis at Deer Creek matchup. First 5A2 game I've seen this season. It's always a great district to cover. Deer Creek finally got in the win column last week, beating rival Piedmont. Clayton Sims is playing really well at quarterback after moving in from Jones and taking control of the quarterback battle once Julian Hoskins has dealt with some injuries behind him, and he's played really well. And I'm interested to see how well they score on McGinnis's defense, which has been playing really well. I mean, the numbers didn't show it against Guthrie last week, but Guthrie's an entirely different animal than anyone they've played. And Guthrie, from all accounts that I've heard about them, is still the same Guthrie as last year almost. They're still really talented and one of the top 3 or 4 teams in 5A. So that's where I'm at this week, and I'm really looking forward to it.
One thing with Deer Creek, I think it's kind of interesting. You mentioned they finally got in the win column. Their early season schedule, 5A team playing nothing but 6A and non-district. How do you think that you think that helps them now that they're playing nothing but 5A teams?
I think it does. I think it really sets them up to deal with some athleticism and talent in their district. Piedmont, it's a rivalry game. You're going to play that a little close no matter what. I don't put a lot of stock in that, and I think the second half, when they scored 31 points, I really think it showed what they're capable of offensively at the 5A level. Norman is really good defensively. We saw them take Westmoore to overtime, beat them. UConn beat them. Stillwater, Stillwater is undefeated and has beaten some really good teams, beat them. So it's good experience for him, and I think it makes I keep mentioning Clayton Sims, but it makes him better coming from 3A to the 5A level with his first 3 games going against 6A defenses that are with that kind of speed with Brandon Prather and guys like that back there. I think it really benefits someone like that, and it benefits their defense because Blake Landon's a really good linebacker for them, and they've got a pretty good secondary. So I really think it helps them out for a team like McGinnis that's still looking to find its offensive identity.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for the podcast this week. We hope you'll be back to join us next week.